Great, great. So we're recording the event today, and if you don't want to appear in the recording, please go ahead and turn your cameras off. But before the introductions, I want to tell you about our next event, which will be on Sunday, March 13th, and it's called Wordplay, Poems with a Sense of Humor. And the poet David Jewell from Austin, Texas, will be joining me as the co-host of this event. And we'll also have a special guest, Kevin Pilkington, will come on and read a couple of his playful poems as well. So come back for a good time, many smiles, and a few good laughs, I think. Something that if you live in Maine or in the north of any kind, you'll be desperately needing by March of this year. Winter goes on long enough. And if you're a poet with a chapbook of poems, or you know someone who is, our 2022 chapbook contest in collaboration with Maine Media Workshops in College is going on now, accepting submissions until February 28th. And there is a $1,000 prize, and the juror for the contest will be Naomi Shihab-Nye. So more about that on our website. So on to today's event. The first written poem that ever found was a love poem. It was written about 2000 BC, and it's named The Love Song of Shin. It was discovered during excavations in the Mesopotamian region and translated many years after the discovery by an archaeologist, Samuel Noah Kramer. So love poems have been around for a long time, and they've changed over the centuries to reflect religious and cultural attitudes about love. Today's selections are all from contemporary poets interpreting an age-old theme. I know you're going to enjoy it. Our first reader today will be Anna Limontas-Salisbury from New York City. She's a poet, writer, freelance journalist, and an educator. She's a graduate of Hunter College and Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism, and her poetry can be found in SFWP Quarterly, on the Poets Corner site, and La Libretta. She's been a featured poet at Camperdown, a poetry reading series at Halyards, Honey Dipped Productions, Body Love, Leaflet Live, and WOC reading series. Following Anna will be Gibson Faye-LeBlanc, who is the director of Maine Writers and Publishers Association. Gibson's first collection of poetry, Death of a Ventriloquist, won the Vassar Miller Prize and was featured by poets and writers as one of a dozen debut collections to watch. I see those features and I'm always envious. I think it's well-deserved, Gibson. His second book, Deek Dangle Dive, was published just recently in 2021 by Kevin Carey Press, and his poems have appeared in the New Republic, Tin House, Jubilate, Poetry Northwest, and Orion. And following Gibson will be Margaret Haberman, who lives and writes in Hope, Maine. She is by profession an American Sign Language interpreter, and she teaches at the University of Southern Maine in the linguistics department. Her poems have been published in the Island Journal, in the journal Spiritus, and they've been selected for the Maine Public Radio program, Poems from Here. So would you all just join me in a very warm welcome for all three of our poets, and we'll kick off with Anna. But Anna, you're up first.
Okay, I'm ready. Hi, everybody. Happy Valentine's Day. Thank you for coming out to Love is Still Possible. So the first poem that I'm going to read is a poem called Mountain Dew Commercial, disguised as a love poem. And this is by Matthew Olsman. So here's what I've got. The reasons why our marriage might work. Because you wear pink, but write poems about bullets and gravestones. Because you yell at your keys when you lose them and laugh loudly at your own jokes. Because you can hold a pistol, gut a pig. Because you memorize songs, even commercials from 30 years back, and sing them when vacuuming. You have soft hands. Because when we moved, the contents of what you packed were written inside the boxes. Because you think the swans are overrated and kind of stupid. Because you drove me to the train station. You drove me to Minneapolis. You drove me to Providence. Because you underline everything you read and circle the things you think are important and put stars next to the things you think I should think are important, and write notes in the margins about all the people you're mad at, and my name is almost never appears there. Because you made that pork recipe you found in the Frida Kahlo cookbook. Because when you read that essay by Rilke, you underlined the whole thing except for the part where Rilke says love means to deny the self and to be consumed in flames. Because when the lights are off, the curtains drawn, and an additional sheet is nailed over the windows, you'll still believe someone outside can see you. And one day, 5 summers ago, when you couldn't put gas in your car, when your fridge was so empty, not even leftovers or condiments, there was a single 20-ounce bottle of Mountain Dew, which you paid for with your last damn dime, because you once overheard me say that I liked it. I chose that poem because there was just so much playfulness in the piece. It was a new poem to me when we started talking about this program, and a friend sent that to me, and I've just read it just about every day since she sent it. So I hope you enjoyed that one. The next poem that I'm going to read is Tonight in Oakland by Danez Smith. This is also a poet that I've been watching for a little bit. I'm still gathering lots of information about new poems, new poets, and I hope you enjoy this one too. So here goes, Tonight in Oakland. I did not come here to sing a blues. Lately, I open my mouth and out comes marigolds, yellow plums. I came to make the sky a garden. Give me rain or give me honey, dear Lord. The sky has given us no water this year. I ride my bike to a boy. When I get there, we make what we make will not be beautiful or love at all, but it will be deserved. I started seeking men to wet the harvest. Come, tonight I declare we must move instead of pray. Tonight, east of here, 2 boys, one dressed in what could be blood, and one dressed in what could be blood before the wound, meat and mean mug. And God, tonight, let them dance. Tonight, the bullet does not exist. Tonight, the police have turned to their God for forgiveness. Tonight, we bury nothing. We serve a God who, with no need for shovels, we serve a God with a bad hip and a brother in prison. Tonight, let every man be his own Lord. Let wherever two people stand be a reunion of ancient lights. Let's waste the moon marble glow, shouting our names to the stars until we are the stars. Oh, precious God. Oh, sweet Black town. I am drunk and I thirst. When I get to the boy who lets me practice hunger with him, I will not give him the name of our newest ghost. I will give him my body, and what he does with it is none of my business, but I will say, look, I made it a whole day. Still no rain, still I'm without exit wound. And he will say, tonight, I want to take you how the police do, unarmed and sudden. And tonight, when we dream of dancing in a city slowly becoming ash. And I chose that poem because the title of our program is Love is Still Possible. And this is Black History Month. This is a day for looking at and thinking and discussing contemporary love poems. And what I love about what this poet is saying in this poem is that, you know, let the world go to hell. love is still possible. And you and I are still here. We're still present. And what we should be doing is getting as much love and giving as much love as we can, you know, bullets be damned.
What a wonderful
message. Thanks, Anna. Those are amazing poems. I love both of those. So I'm gonna add a couple more here. And actually, before I do, I wanted to share. I was just reading Claudia Rankine's new book, Just Us, and there was a great. My antenna's up right now for anything about love because of this, and maybe it's always up for that. Hopefully, but Claudia Rankine writes, the poet Erica. This is a quote. The poet Erica Hunt describes love as a close reading that helps me invent myself more in the future. That's the most workable definition I've found to date. So I thought that made me think. A close reading that helps me invent myself more. I love that. I'm going to read a short poem by Kim Adonisio called My Heart. My heart. That Mississippi chicken shack, that initial scarred tabletop, that tiny little dance floor to the left of the band, that kiosk at the mall selling caramels and kitsch, that toll booth with its white plastic gloved worker handing you your change, that phone booth with the receiver ripped out, that dressing room in the fetish boutique, those curtains and mirrors, that funhouse, that horror, that soundtrack of screams, that pooty-filled heaven raining guilt from the ceiling, that haven for truckers, that bottomless cup, that biome, that wilderness preserve, that landing strip with no runway lights, where you are aiming your plane, imagining a voice in the tower, imagining a tower. I just love all the different things that the places that all the things that Kim Adonisio makes her, or the speaker of this poem makes her heart into, imagines her heart as. Anyways, so yeah, that's why I chose that poem. And I would say too, before I read this next one, this next poem is by Terence Hayes, who's a poet who I'm sure many of you know is a wonderful poet. And I would say this is a love poem at an angle, a love poem that it doesn't seem like a love poem, but maybe it is, and maybe it's also complicated, which is a kind of a love poem that I appreciate. So this is called God is an American. I still love words. When we make love in the morning, your skin damp from a shower, the day calms. Schadenfreude may be the best way to name the covering of adulthood, the powdered sugar on a black shirt. I am alone now, on the top floor, pulled by obsession, the ink on my fingers. And sometimes it is difficult. It is a difficult name. Sometimes it is like the world before America, the kinship of fools and hunters, the children, the dazed dream of mothers with no style. A word can be the boot print in a square of fresh cement and the glaze of morning. Your response to my kiss is, I have a cavity. I am in love with incompletion. I am clinging to your moorings. Yes, I have a pretty good idea what beauty is. It survives all right. It aches like an open book. It makes it difficult to live. So that's, like I said, Terence Hayes, a love poem at an angle.
Okay, can you all hear me? So I have tried everything that I know how to do to get my phone and my messages not to beep while I'm doing this reading, and my phone just rang. So please forgive me in advance if that happens. We'll just tell them to call back. The first poem I'm going to read is also it's a love poem at an angle. It's by Christian Bach, and I may be saying the name wrong. It's B-A-L-K, and it's called John Muir Remembers Eliza Hendricks. Eliza, if wood smoke had not hung above the road, if the road had not been warmed, then cooled, then warmed, then frozen over with ice too smooth to give firm footing, if we had not seen the ruffed grouse perched in the poplar like a fat mottled pear, if its flanks had not been puffed or streaked with brown, its tail not fanned with silver, if it had not been feeding on winter buds, if it had not been silent, if it had drummed or whirred its wings, or lifted its ruff, or called, if it had been afraid of you or me, if you had not pressed your hand gently against the small of my back, if the grouse had not smoothed its feathers, not arched its neck, not raised its crest, not lengthened its body slowly, opening like a fist, unclenching, if you had not touched me, if the bird had not tilted its head to listen to us breathe, if there had been a wind, if the bird had separated itself from the tree to fly down close to the ground with rapid wing beats sweeping away the invisible, intricate paths of mice, if the sun had not burned through the smoke or parted the haze or surrounded your hair with light, then I would have walked back with you that afternoon to the house where the pewter bowls sat, on the oak table, in the room where I used to watch you ironing sheets, opening each crumpled hem, smoothing the lace with cast iron and steam. I would not have to bear the weight of all the wings I've failed to see, all of them folded in the tops of the closest trees. Eliza, I wish I had not fled from you. This next poem is one of my own. It's called Watermarks. Watermarks. It takes time to navigate my love affair with Captain Skip Green and his relentless love of all things nautical, and my relentless love of his rough hands on wooden tiller, blue eyes scanning. He sees horizon edges, granite, shapes of darkness beneath the strained and weighty sail, guillemots and their clown red feet, the flying pillow of a puffin out near Matinicus Rock. He does not look to starboard, to the tilted surface where I stand. My hands smooth, still young, the helm handed to me in calm seas and a following breeze, in August, but never September. Heart seized up like Danforth anchor, mired in mud, rode frayed, tangled round a lobster buoy. Cross hitch, half hitch, clove hitch, which one holds and which one binds, which one slips and which one tightens. I longed for the doldrums and he the gale. His courtship began in a green and white pea pod, a pint of cherry vanilla ice cream tucked beneath the gunnels. We rode out near the ledges in the dusk of a falling tide, and so I called it fate. It takes time to push off, away, back to land, and in winter, as snow started to fall, water on water, boots skidding across a frozen lake, my love affair disappears behind me like scuff marks on the ice. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm gonna follow that up. Like, I love all the images in that piece of sea and sky and the birds. In the last two, there were just so many beautiful images of nature, all wrapped up in descriptions of different types of relationships. It was really, thank you so much. So I'm gonna read, let me see. I'm gonna read Don't You Wonder Sometimes. It's just, I think I'm just doing the first stanza. And this is by Tracy K. Smith. After dark, stars glisten like ice, and the distance they span hides something elemental. Not God exactly, more like some thin-hipped, glittering Bowie being, a starman or cosmic ace hovering, swaying, aching to make us see. And what we would do, and what would we do, you and I, if we could know for sure that someone was there squinting through the dust, saying nothing is lost, that everything lives on, waiting only to be wanted back badly enough? Would you go then, even for a few nights, into that other life where you and that first she loved, blind to the future once and happy? Would I put on my coat and return to the kitchen where my mother and father sit waiting, dinner keeping warm on the stove? Bowie will never die. Nothing will come for him in his sleep or charging through his veins, and he'll never grow old, just like the woman you lost, who will always be dark-haired and flush-faced, running toward an electronic screen. The clocks, the minutes, the miles left to go, just like the life in which I am forever a child, looking out my window at the night sky, thinking, one day I'll touch the world with bare hands, even if it burns. And so this next one is another sort of play on the stars in the universe and a poet's connection to them. So this next poem is Date Night and this is by S. Aaron Batiste. It's Saturday night again, and soon the streets of Old Town will be littered with lovers. The autumn air will thicken with sugary coffees, cream sauces, and seared meats, drawing out the lecher-eyed couples. The palms weaving tightly together. Like a loom, they will limbo under string lights. Entire scenes awash in wanting. South of Union Avenue, my telephone only reflects back the same indifferent blackness as the September sky. Full of Pinot and bored with staring at the long shadow engraved on the dinner chair opposite mine, I trick my body early into its usual flannel and solid cotton, desperate for something to hold. I raise my sleepy window shade and a dollop of stars show themselves. I imagine the constellation as arms, whole galaxies coalesced, ready to embrace. And so I guess, there's many ways for love, the universe is just out there waiting for you to take notice.
Thanks, Anna. That was great. So this next poem that I'm going to add in to our pile of love poems is by the poet Stanley Kunitz. And if you don't know Stanley's work, I just want to say, because I think it helps to hear this poem, he had an amazing career and he died at the age of 100. He wrote this poem when he was 90. And he wrote this poem. He was married to his wife, Elise Asher, for almost 50 years. She was a painter. He was a poet. And he was a slight man. I had the occasion to hear him read his poems on a number of times. He was a small statured man. He had these giant eyes that blazed. And I remember him well reading this poem. So that's a little bit about Stanley. There's a lot more to know about him, but this is called Touch Me. Summer is late, my heart. Words plucked out of the air some 40 years ago, when I was wild with love and torn almost in two, scattered like leaves this night of whistling wind and rain. It is my heart that's late. It is my song that's flown. Outdoors all afternoon under a gunmetal sky, staking my garden down. I kneeled to the crickets trilling underfoot as if about to burst from their crusty shells. And like a child again, marveled to hear so clear and brave a music pour from such a small machine. What makes the engine go? Desire, desire, desire. The longing for the dance stirs in the buried life. One season only, and it's done. So let the battered old willow thrash against the window panes and the house timbers creak. Darling, do you remember the man you married? Touch me, remind me who I am. Stanley Kunitz. And here's one by me. This is what I've often described as a New York City love poem written when I lived down there. It's with a title stolen from Shakespeare. More matter, less art. As a sycamore on 104th makes plastic bags fettered to limbs into garments of muslin and wind, so have you filled me with holes. As a fox sparrow under a hedge behind a fence twits and prets and goes unnoticed, so have your small touches worked into my fourth ventricle and unspoken chorus I can't call up and can't forget. I forgot to tell you when you left how I swallowed you while we slept. Not as in the throat, as in the bird, its hidden note.
Thank you, Gibson. I think it's my turn. And thank you, Anna. Oh, okay. My next selection is from Rita Dove. It's called Heart to Heart. It's neither red nor sweet. It doesn't melt or turn over, break or harden, so it can't feel pain, yearning, regret. It doesn't have a tip to spin on. It isn't even shapely, just a thick clutch of muscle, lopsided, mute. Still, I feel it inside its cage, sounding a dull tattoo. I want, but I can't open it. There's no key. I can't wear it on my sleeve or tell you from the bottom of it how I feel. Here, it's all yours now, but you'll have to take me too. And this next one is one of my just favorite poems in the world. And to me, it's all about, I think it was Anna in one of our first meetings about this event. It talked about just the expansiveness of love. And all these poems speak to that. This is called From Blossoms by Lee Young Lee. From blossoms comes this brown paper bag of peaches we bought from the boy at the bend in the road where we turned toward signs painted peaches. From laden boughs, from hands, from sweet fellowship in the bins comes nectar at the roadside, succulent peaches we devour, dusty skin and all. Comes the familiar dust of summer, dust we eat. Oh, to take what we love inside, to carry within us an orchard, to eat not only the skin, but the shade, not only the sugar, but the days, to hold the fruit in our hands, adore it, then bite into the round jubilance of peach. There are days we live as if death were nowhere in the background, from joy to joy to joy, from wing to wing, from blossom to impossible blossom to sweet, impossible blossom.
Thank you, Margaret. I think for our last round, we'll keep it to just one poem apiece, if you would. So we have plenty of time to talk about them.
Okay, so am I up next? I'm sorry. Okay, so I'm gonna follow up peaches with some biscuits, Margaret. I think Gibson had mentioned one of the other earlier pieces talked about some fried chicken along the roadside too. So, all right, so here's This Body Needs a Biscuit. And this is one of my poems. This body needs a biscuit every now and then. The kind that sits in tongue memory, the kind of biscuit rolled by a Black woman whose hands healed. Peppermint candy unraveling loudly, retrieved from a black purse, snapped shut by a gold clasp, hung on the bedpost when not snug in her lap. This body needs a biscuit rolled from the hands, setting curcumber droplets on a busted knee. This body needs a biscuit from the mouth that yelled salve on the back of the sink. Like doctors on TV call stat, salve, a salvation for boils and other body mysteries oozing to get out. This body needs a biscuit from the one whose mouth hummed praise, whose hands shaped bread into prayer, pushed and rolled flour with the same pin shaken at you in a threat. This body needs a biscuit pressed from a thick-lipped white coffee mug with a broken handle. This body needs a biscuit from the one who used a butter knife, not a steak knife, to spread salted butter over hot cushions into a mouth waiting on communion with a body that needs a biscuit. Thank you.
Anna, I love that poem. Thank you for reading it. For my last poem to throw into our pile here, I'm going to read a poem by Robert Haas called Letter. This is a poem from his first book. Yeah, I think I've had this poem saved for about at least 25 years. I don't know, but maybe a little longer than that. Letter. I had wanted to begin by telling you I saw another tanager below the pond, where I had sat for a half hour feeding. Sorry, let me start over. I had wanted to begin by telling you I saw another tanager below the pond, where it had sat for a half an hour feeding on wild berries in the little clearing near the pines that hide the lower field, and then looked up from the red berries to the quick red bird brilliant in the light. I have seen more yarrow and swaying Queen Anne's lace around the woods as hawkweed and nightshade wither and drop seed. A new blue flower, sweet yellow ovary inferior, has recently sprung up. But I had the odd feeling, walking to the house to write this down, that I had left the birds and flowers in the field, rooted or feeding. They are not in my head, are not now on this page. It was very strange to me, but I think their loss was your absence. I wanted to be walking up with Leaf, the sun behind us skipping off the pond, the windy maple sheltering the house, and find you there and say, here, a new blue flower, ovary inferior, and busy Leaf and Chris with naming in a world I love. You even have my field guide. It's you I love. I have believed so long in the magic of names and poems. I hadn't thought them bodiless at all. Tall buttercup, wild vetch. Often I am permitted to return to a meadow. It all seemed real to me last week. Words. You are the body of my world. Root and flower. The brightness and surprise of birds. I miss you, love. Tell Leaf you're the names of things.
Thank you, Gibson and Anna. Anna, that biscuit poem is so great. I think biscuits and peaches are what we need this winter, and fried chicken. I'm going to read a poem by John Ashbery called Late Echo. And just as by way of introduction, a young man that I eventually married gave this poem to me, I think when I was 19, and it was 1979, and he typed it out on a manual typewriter. And I still have that copy of this poem it has a little shadow of Scotch tape, and then his signature with the name of the author. And I've kept it all these years, and we read it this morning. As I admit, I was really kind of cranky with him because we've been living in this very small space and both working from home, and it's like, could you just like go outside for a while? But really, I don't think at 19 I knew, I had the understanding of this poem of a 19-year-old, which is fine. But I love that I am now 61 and with the person who gave me this poem. And so now I have a very different understanding of it. Neither one is better than the other, but I feel blessed to read it to you today. And it's called Late Echo. Alone with our madness and favorite flower, we see that there is really, let me start again. Alone with our madness and favorite flower, we see that there really is nothing left to write about. Or rather, it is necessary to write about the same old things in the same way, repeating the same things over and over for love to continue and be gradually different. Beehives and ants have to be re-examined eternally, and the color of the day put in hundreds of times and varied from summer to winter for it to get slowed down to the pace of an authentic saraband and huddle there alive and resting. Only then can the chronic inattention of our lives drape itself around us, conciliatory and with one eye on those long, tan, plush shadows that speak so deeply into our unprepared knowledge of ourselves, the talking engines of our day.
Margaret, that was so beautiful. And I love the love story that you told to go along with that. It's like that poem was written for you. And it certainly was gifted to you. So thank you all. I feel like I've been, I think I said this before, given this huge box of chocolates that I can taste all these different forms of love in them. And now I'd like to, have a bit of conversation, but I'd like to kick it off because Anna, you talked a little bit about the name for this reading, Love is Still Possible. And I think you were the one that suggested it. And you also gave us a wonderful quote from Bell Hooks' book, All About Love. And I wondered if you would read that quote now to kind of kick off our conversation a little bit. You're muted.
Yeah, I was trying not to make any noise while anybody was reading and forgot. So the quote is this: "It is far easier to talk about loss than it is to talk about than it is to talk about love. It is easier to articulate the pain of love's absence than to describe its presence and meaning in our lives." And so I chose that quote because I thought that there was so much truth in it. And one of the things, so I picked up this book recently. This is the book. This is where the quote comes from. It's right in the introduction. And this is Bell Hooks' All About Love. And I thought there was so much truth in what she said. I had looked at a couple of interviews that she had done based on this book and others. And one of the things that she had written about, she also wrote about art and culture. And one of the things that she was very sad to start finding was that she was finding that a lot of like at the point of like when rap was becoming like very prevalent, and she thought that some of the new young women who were rappers, that, you know, the attitude was very much of the what's love got to do with it. And she felt disappointed. One of the things that she also says in this same essay at the very beginning of the book was that how did we go from like her generation, or how did we go from the summer of love to this? And so I thought like, oh, that's so telling, that, you know, there is a lot of apathy when it comes to love. I think that that is still going on. And it is hard for people to think about all the different types of love that they are. Most prevalent when we think about Valentine's Day is, you know, the very romantic kind of love. But from the poems that we read today, there was so much love in descriptions of nature and connecting with people. I think the poem that Gibson read from his favorite, now I'm forgetting, I had the nerve to put it in the chat, and now I'm forgetting, but it was like a touch. And I thought there was something so real about right now. And if love is like in trouble, well, it's really in trouble now because of the absence of touch, of this distance that we've had from each other, physically and spiritually. Spiritually from each other, spiritually from nature, spiritually from the creator, whatever divine possibility that you believe in. And so I was really happy to be asked to participate in this, because the idea that love is possible, I meant that, you know, it is still possible. I mean, we can all think of things that are still going on right now from like the last 2 years. Maybe some of us have been struggling before the pandemic even started. And so this idea to really be able to hold on to love is so important, because without it, it doesn't matter what else goes on without it. And we can see there's so many examples of people who have money and people who have shelter and don't have anything to worry about. And yet, you know, love is, it's a necessary ingredient in all of our lives. And so, you know, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about love and all its different aspects, right? In this, and have these poems be the catalyst to discuss love.
Thank you for kicking us off with that. And maybe Gibson and Margaret, you can talk about what you were thinking about as you made your selections today.
Yeah, I was going to jump in and build on that and say, I agree. I love how you said that, Anna, and I would add also what I was thinking about both before today and listening to the readings, is that the love poem, not only is love possible, but the love poem is still possible. There's a lot of examples here of people doing that so well, and it's not easy to do, right? Because on the one hand, you have this giant suitcase of all the cliches of love that we carry around, you know, like all the things we've heard a million times, and they're, you know, I don't know how long ago that, you know, the Valentine stuff went up at the pharmacy, but it was a long time ago. And you know, you've got that on the one hand, and on the other hand, it's always easier to be ironic, to be, you know, to sort of be dismissive of love, to be dismissive of feeling, to not be earnest in that feeling. And there's a lot of examples of poems of poets doing that in these poems, you know, just sort of like finding a way to surprise us, which is, I think, what love does, right? But also what a good poem about love does, which is it surprises us, whether it's by some image or series of images or some music, or taking phrases that we've heard before and just, you know, turning them, tweaking them so that we hear them anew in our ears. So that's some of what I was thinking about.
I love that. I feel like that was what that John Ashbery poem that you shared, Margaret, was telling us. You know, we have to find a new way to say the same thing, this age-old concept of love, but it means something uniquely personal to every one of us. I thought that was a great choice of poems.
Thank you. Did you want me to say something?
Yeah, do you want to talk about, you know, what your
Oh,
thinking was
this
broadly?
this
and
was
your
hard.
selection?
I kept thinking about Joni Mitchell, who when I was young was one of my favorite artists, and her album Miles of Isles, which is her live album. And I should have, I looked and to see if I could find it, but she introduces some song and says, this is a song about love gone wrong, my favorite theme, or something like that. And I thought, well, you know, how do you write about, it was very different for me to now be in my 60s and think, well, what do I want to say about love, and what kind of poems do I want to pick for this event? And I think that's why I love the idea of it being expansive. It's tiny and small. It's in the coffee we make every morning, but it's also in the peaches and the biscuits and the fried chicken. And yeah, so I'm at a loss a bit as to what to say about love, but I'm so glad to be here.
That is great. You know, I think I also listened to an interview with Bell Hooks. I haven't read the book yet, but when she talked about love being, you know, so much more than our original concept or conventional concept of romantic love. And Anna, you talked about that, but it being the love of a child, and the love that you talked about of biscuits and peaches, the love of the world, self-love and selfless love. And I think Mary Oliver once said, you know, her work as a poet was loving the world. And that's, you know, that's what I felt from her poetry. So, you know, and I think each of you have chosen poems that reflected that more expansive nature of love in ways that, you know, as you said, Gibson, the ways that surprise us. And so I wonder, because you've each shared one of your own, what is it like to write a love poem? And were you trying to write a love poem? And how do you avoid the cliches about love? And did you struggle with that? Margaret.
Anna and Gibson, if you don't mind, I'll jump in. The poem that I read had this really interesting, for me, evolution. There used to be a cafe in Portland called the Aurora Cafe, which I don't think exists anymore. And you'd stand in line, and behind was this amazing photograph of this guy with a beard, with his hand on a tiller, looking out to sea, and the caption was something Captain Skip Green. And I used to get coffee and too many scones there a lot, and I would stare at that picture of Captain Skip Green, and I'd think that is the man I always fell in love with. That was never the right fit. And so the poem evolved as something very personal, but out of this picture of this person. I have no idea who Skip Green is. And in a way, trying to write about, you know, claiming one's own ground after a love that was not a good fit. So that was how mine came about.
How wonderful. I thought it was a story about your own personal experience, and it was, but it's an ekphrastic poem in a way. Isn't that great?
I can say something about my poem. that I read. I mean, that poem is, I think, was built out of just looking around New York City when I was living there at the time and feeling feelings. And um, but apart from that, I think it was also, I think for me in writing that poem, what I had to do, I think I'm sure I wrote a bunch of drafts as I often do, and I think I had to follow the music of the poem. It's a poem that's got a lot of chiming in the word choice, not quite rhyme, but chiming of different kinds. Um, and for me, following the music of a poem can be a way to, especially in a poem that, um, in a love poem, and like I think the the my tendency is to like grip this when I'm driving the car, writing the poem. This is my metaphor here. um, that I'm gripping the steering wheel too tight. Like I really want to get to this certain place, like I can see it over there, like this, it's going to have this beautiful conclusion that's going to make everybody's, the top of their heads come off, and with this thing that we all realized about love, and that's just like, that's the road. That's where you wind up in a ditch, like that never works. But, if I can follow the music of a poem, it's like I'm not okay. Let me maybe just not worry about what I'm going to say for a minute, and let me just listen to the poem and see where it's going to take me, um, and maybe get surprised. So like it's surprising. If I'm going to hope to surprise my reader, I got to surprise myself, and sometimes that means driving with the hands a little looser, letting things be a little freer.
I love that whole idea of listening to the poem and seeing where it wants to go and hearing the music of the poem as you talk about, and letting that be what leads you to the surprise of the poem.
Well, I'm listening to Gibson, and I'm thinking like the first thing that I thought when you asked the question was like, how do you get to a love poem? And I was thinking immediately like by being a teenager and writing the worst poetry that you can write for years, that you keep hidden in a notebook that, like after your first few times of like sending something out, because I was thinking about Margaret talking about Joni Mitchell, and I was thinking about like my early influences for poetry were all lyrical because, we were all listening, well, some of us, I guess I can't speak for everybody here, we're listening to music on top 40 radio, and everything was pretty much pop. And so when I first started writing poetry, I was pretty much writing like pretty much what I heard. And I always had a chorus and a hook. And so like thinking about like how my idea of a love poem has expanded. When I wrote that poem, This Body Needs a Biscuit, it was actually for, I can't remember like what came first, the chicken or the egg. There was a poetry event that I'd gotten invited to, and it was called Body Love, to celebrate the love of the body in all its forms, in all its shapes and sizes. And so I thought like, okay, I write about food every now and then because for me, food is love. The catalyst in that poem is my great grandmother, who made biscuits on a regular basis. And I think when I wrote that poem, one of my comfort foods going into the pandemic was biscuits. It was like, well, what can I do to comfort myself being alone? What is something that I have always enjoyed and now have time for? So I can whip up some biscuits by scratch in a minute. And I have always thought about this particular food, the way that she would knead, the way that she would be humming or singing, and also about how she could love us and, and give us a pop all within the same. Like it was always like a mystery to me. Like, how do you love somebody and then sometimes there's moments where you don't love them? She had many grandchildren and great grandchildren, and there were many times where I know she didn't love all of us all the time, but she was she was pretty much the catalyst for that poem. And also, I guess, the beginning of me understanding that love is not always, it doesn't have one format. We're not always lovey-dovey. We don't always like each other. There are times where I guess we don't love each other very much either. But what I learned from that pretty much is that it's a circle, it's a cycle. It goes in cycles. There's times where we want to be closer, times where we want to have more distance, time where we need to get away from each other, but always time to, that being away sometimes draws us back. And there's nothing like thinking that this great grandmother, I'm at my mom's house in Jersey, and I'm finding all kinds of pictures and things, and thinking that even though she has been gone physically for 30 years, her presence is very much alive. It's alive in the stories we tell. Someone put in the chat that they had just come from a Healing Turtle Island poetry reading today, and that it was all about love. And I was like, wow, that was just like dead on, because as that comment was coming up, that's when I was like, oh, I know I'm going to read this poem. And so so it's all in sync, that pretty much that love does have all of these facets, all these different connections with people. And definitely, we read some things here today that connected us to the earth and to people. And really, I love that poems were read about mature love, about love between couples, after many years, and that someone 90 could write a poem about a 50-year relationship. I'm like, oh, those are goals. Goals. There's still possible love goals out here. So, this has just been a very, I guess this has been poetry church today. Or poetry meditation, poetry meditation day.
I love that. And I love that Stanley Kunitz poem that you read, Gibson. And I'm familiar with him, but not the broad body of his work. And I love that he could write that at 90 and that he lived to 100. I'm aspirational of that. And I just want to read what was posted by Barbara in the chat about what you mentioned, Anna. She said, I've come to this poetry reading today from attending Healing Turtle Island. As I've listened to the stories and wisdom of the indigenous people from around the world this weekend, the word that would fill the center of a word map is love. Love is healing. Unconditional love of all creation is our human spiritual calling, as I've learned via the indigenous grandmothers. Isn't that just beautiful? Thank you, Barbara, for sharing that event and thoughts. Yeah, now I'm going to move to kind of a different topic, but today's New York Times had a series of essays that was a collaboration from Black History Month and Modern Romance called Black Love. And it was a series of wonderful short essays in the style of modern romance, if you're familiar with that. And it just got me thinking, do you think that there's a different expression of love depending on our racial or ethnic or cultural or religious or gender or sexual orientation or any kind of identity that we hold? And do we also, what comes into play when we read outside of our own experience and understanding of love? So it's kind of a big question, but I want to throw it out to any of you to talk about that.
I think it's a really good question, Megan. I'm sure I don't have the answers. But what it makes me think of, the first thing that it makes me think of is it makes me think of poets that I have come to know in translation, writing about love, and how oftentimes they bring something. I mean, when I teach any poetry in translation, I always talk about this. I think obviously like always a certain amount of things. You can't bring everything over, right, from the original language, whatever it is. There's always going to be some amount of stuff that gets lost in the translation. Um, but there is something you can bring over if it's done well, if it works out. Um, and and I think of poets like Pablo Neruda, who, like he was so well known, especially at the end of his life. But people still pick up his love sonnets and read them, um, and I think in part because he was able to find something in there and to express some things in those poems that wasn't happening in poems as much written, in English. So, and I think, anyways, I guess that's a way of saying that I think it's always worth letting the expression of love come from as many different quarters as we can see and experience and take in, because I do think there's so many, it's an infinite way maybe of ways to express love, and to experience love, and so and there's certainly something like there's probably some thread of universality in all of that, I think, but there's also these huge variations depending on who we are, where we are, when we are. Um, so
And in a sense, aren't we always reading it in translation? We're translating it through our own experience and filter on the world. When I was reading that 2,000-year-old love poem translated by the archaeologists, I'm thinking, okay, this sounds very modern. I wonder how much is the perspective of the translator here, Other comments, Anna or Margaret, about, reading outside of our own cultural boundaries, if you will.
Well, I guess thinking about like the poem that I read today and why I chose that first poem, or the second one tonight, in Oakland, because
Yeah.
it was about, love that's outside of my own experience. And I felt like it was important to be able to bring poems to this table, to share in as many different forms and as many different ways as possible. We know that when you are heterosexual, it is very difficult for many people outside of that to imagine that love for same sex, or even people who consider themselves fluid, it is often very difficult for many people to understand someone else's love experience. And I just thought it's important to be able to share as many different love experiences as possible. I think within the last few years, there's been a lot of, I'm on Twitter. I may have to leave Twitter so that I can continue to stay in the love vibe. But one of the things that I remember seeing a while back is this expression, love is love. And I love that expression because I really do believe that that's true. Love is love. It really, how it comes about, who you love, how you love them, all of that is really of no bearing when you see that someone else or something makes someone feel a particular way, to go out of themselves to express love for someone else, and even love that's not always, reciprocated. it's what we're here for, you know. Sometimes you're going to crash and burn, but the idea of being able to understand other people's love, it's absolutely necessary. And I think like poetry is a great vehicle for that, for people to be able to understand the many different facets of love. It really is a way to be able to open a barrier for many people who, you know, just may not, you know, see things in a particular way.
And poetry seems to help bridge our understanding.
Yes.
Margaret, did you want to say anything else on that topic, or you? I mean, we covered a lot, and
Yeah.
I'm really open to questions from the chat too. Just
I'm good, Meg.
good. I've seen a lot of wonderful comments in the chat, but haven't seen questions come up. You know, so I have a question that's really different, but someone once told me, don't title your poem a love poem or something like that. Just don't put love poem in the title. And I bristled, of course, but I think they were trying to say when you give it a title, you set an expectation that may, you know, that's based almost like a cliche. It's based on somebody else's old experiences of that, and it's not as open. But so maybe what do you think about when you title a poem? I mean, obviously Neruda wrote a whole book of love sonnets and he titled it that, but what do you think about when you pick a title for your poem? And especially a love poem.
Yeah, I mean, it's true that you put that word love right in the title, and and we bring all of our stuff with that, right? It's like that word is carrying all this stuff. But I always also say that, you know, anytime anyone tries to make a rule about poetry, any about anything, somebody else is going to just, you know, break that into shards. It doesn't work, right? Like I mean, can any of you say what a poem is? I can't, you know, like I have a lot of ideas about, and I feel like I know when I'm in the presence of a poem and when I'm not, but you know, like people, we're still, you know, you're still finding new ways to make poems. So I guess I wouldn't ever tell anybody not to put love in a or love poem in their title. But I would say that if you do it, you'd be prepared for all your audience carrying all that stuff with them, right, and into the poem. And so maybe you're going to have to do something to help us hear that word in a way that's felt and surprising and all of that. I mean, that Kim Adonisio poem, you know, she didn't put love in the poem, but she calls it my heart. You know, it's like, okay, here we go. This could be like a middle school, you know, a love poem, but you know, it's that Mississippi chicken shack, right? So it's like she's playing with us there, like my heart. Okay, yeah, it's a Mississippi chicken shack, and we're like, what? Wait, what are you talking about? So yeah.
I knew what she was talking
about. Me too.
Yeah, and you keep coming back to this thing about surprising. And I think what's surprising in all of these it is in that level of detail, is in the Mississippi chicken shack that you didn't expect, but it's a very specific image. We have a question in the chat here that says it's a ridiculous math analogy, but in your own poetry, is there a rough percentage of persona poems to authentic self poems? Margaret.
Well, I don't know the math of it, but I was putting, I think I only have one true persona poem, and it's written from the persona of the Statue of Liberty. But I was collecting my poems recently to put in, trying to gather things together for manuscript. And I had a lot of poems that were about me. And like 5 poems. And I thought, okay, well, maybe that's like, what am I trying to do? Am I like making a memoir out of my poems? I don't know that that's a good or bad thing, but it does seem to be what I'm drawn to as a writer. Yeah, I'd be curious what Anna and Gibson have to say.
Well,
Oh, do you want
go ahead, Gibson.
to? I was just going to say my flip answer is that every authentic self poem is in part a persona poem, and every persona poem is in part an authentic self poem. I mean, I think that, right, we are all made up of many selves, and we are, and we are connected to people, and so that's my flip answer. I mean, but I think that's true. That's it is in some ways hard to know where we end and other people begin, and in poems in particular, there can be all sorts of melding of selves. That said, I will also admit I read poems the other night at the University of Farmington, in front of an audience in person, which I hadn't done in a while, and it happened that I was reading all these poems that are very self, poems, and they were coming out of grief and other stuff. But, and so there's a voice in my head saying, oh, geez, like, gosh, you got to fit something else in here. Like, write a poem about some flowers or something that's a little farther away from you or the eye. So I don't know. I think we all feel that. And then I guess I would say to a student who said that to me, I would say, like, write what you have. What are the things that you need to write? What's the thing you need to write today? Write that. And don't worry too much about what it is.
That's great advice. How can you not? That's what you got to work with.
Yeah. I don't know. So this idea about the persona, I think, like, I only have one poem, and it was the one that I read here last year when I got invited for the Valentine's Day poem show. And that poem it's called Live and in Living Color. It's a personal ad. And I know, like, when that poem came to me, I'll be real straight up. Like, I don't know where that poem came from, because that woman in that poem is not me. and so it was probably the first time that I've written something like that. And I just had to keep writing because the words were coming. And I was like, well, whatever this is, just write it down. Because if you don't, you're going to lose it. Because it didn't really feel like it was coming from me at all. I can definitely say that when I wrote the poem, This Body Needs a Biscuit, it was probably one of the first poems in a long time that I was writing about love, but not in the way that I would have like years ago. Like, I'd spend time writing about the breakup, the divorce, the person that you lost. But I felt like to write that poem, This Body Feels the Biscuit, I really was very happy to write that poem, because I do want to expand how I write about love. And I don't always want it to be about something like personal that I experienced. I also had that same feeling when I was writing about trees a few years ago. There's a poetry group. There's a woman on this in the audience with a group called Sweet Action. And Sweet Action was one of the first poetry groups that I'd gotten invited into a few years ago to workshop some poems. And so, like, there were some poems that I was working on, that had to do with like what it was like to grow up as a kid in Jersey, and like what it was like to be amongst woods and trees and flowers and dirt and grass and every wildlife thing that comes around that. So I would definitely say that I'm moving towards more. I'm enjoying creating those kinds of experiences in poems, and very happy to leave, the stuff that's pretty much like the sappy love stuff, the stuff that in that first draft that you're like, you need to throw in a metaphor or do something, because there's just too much of you on the page and not enough of what you want to express.
Well, I just love, do any of you have any last comments you'd like to make? I want to thank you. This has just been a delightful afternoon for me, and based on the comments I've seen in the chat, I think so many people have really appreciated it and appreciated the selections you've made and what you have to say about love. And it's just been inspiring for the afternoon for me. But I'm going to give you all the chance for the last word. Anything you'd like to say before we close up?
No, just that it was a wonderful experience, of a much needed experience. I didn't know if I was gonna make it here today. Got a lot of stuff, family stuff going on, and and I was very committed to being here, but this is the medicine that I needed today. It really was. It really was.
Thank you for
Yeah.
being here.
Yeah, that's well said, and I agree. It's great medicine, and let the love and the poem surprise you. That's my message for the day. To myself as much as anybody else too.
It's a great message.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Meg, Gibson, Anna. This has been
All.
And
thank you all for being here.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all for coming, and come back March 13th for wordplay, poems with a sense of humor. Thanks.